The Celtics have played Denver themselves pretty tough in recent years, especially with Grant and Horford's ability to guard Jokic. That went away in the Denver game with I don't think you were there for that one, the massive rim delay game.
No, I missed. Yeah, I wasn't there for that.
It was like a 45-minute delay. We'll never see anything quite like that again. It was like a rain delay in a basketball game. It was insane. I think Sean Grandy, the play-by-play guy for the Red Celtics radio network, is still traumatized by it. But that was where Denver turned the corner against the Celtics, and you can maybe look back on that game as against the league as well, because they played early in the season when the Celtics were shooting 40% from three as a team, and the Celtics just blew them away at the Garden, and they had that kind of success in recent seasons. Now you're shaking up the dynamic a little bit. Smart's out, Porzingis is in. He hasn't played against Denver a ton. One game with the Nuggets across that year and a half, or with the Wizards across that year and a half or so that he was there. Played well in the game, but Jokic blew him away. Nuggets blew them away. And then I found one most recent game with Dallas where, again, played decently, shot well, but Nuggets came away victorious in that game. So you don't have a ton of these two lined up against each other, especially with the East-West dynamic. You can maybe look back to some of those Knicks years, but Porzingis was a different guy then too, health-wise, and the athleticism. It's so crazy. I'm excited to see him just because this is a guy who's always been one of the more intriguing talents in the NBA between the shooting, as you talk about. Defensively, I think he's going to help the Celtics a lot, but he's a little different. You mentioned the post-up game coming more in the his skill set now, which does help him the way teams have guarded him in the past. But also he's a little more ground bound. There's less flying around in the alley-oops and all the different stuff you saw from his early years with the Knicks. And, he's probably stronger and, able to back guys down and do some of that different stuff now. So there's intrigue here for sure. And I'm willing to see it out. I'm not going to just sit here and say that this isn't going to work, because I see all the reasons you mentioned, and I'm sure all the reasons they looked at it and said this is a no-brainer move, especially when he's going to extend for 2 years at $30 million. But there's some risk here, like who's going to play next to him, how healthy will he be, defensively against a bigger guy like Jokic. Like, is Jokic really going to be able to get into him and move him? That's been a concern with Porzingis in the past. He's not quite that burly center. Even a guy like Grant was going against Jokic in the past, given the success that he had. It was being able to really hold his ground and defend physically. And you're seeing, I think, the Celtics shift from that physicality and versatility defensively to covering space like the rim with Porzingis and the three-point line with the longer guys. I almost wonder if they're going to play a little zone this year with Porzingis, given that they did that with the summer league team. They did quite a bit with their summer league team. So you got to actually see that with the real team. It'll be interesting because obviously that's what the Nuggets saw in the finals quite a bit with the Heat. And the Heat, were able to compete, given their injuries, given their health, given the performance of Butler, decently well against this monster Nuggets team with their defensive schemes and the versatility they were able to show on that end.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see, like you talk about schemes, a little more drop probably.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you saw that last year with Horford, so they're definitely going to do it with Porzingis.
And it makes sense to do it with, like, if you look at how Boston defended last year and the amount of drop that they were running compared to previous years with how much they switched, like, it makes more sense to do that with somebody like Porzingis, who is a really good drop defender, really good. So that's cool. And then you get to see Derek White navigate screens a little bit more. It'll be really fun.
It makes sense on paper, doesn't it? Like if everything falls into place here. Yeah.
Defensively, it does. It's offense I have probably more questions about, but I also get, like, you take three high caliber scorers, 20-point guys, and you put them on the floor. It's like, all right, we're going to take the baseline of that and say that's going to help us, kind of just have that baseline in a sense. But I definitely have more questions offensively. I think just watching the scheme changes that you guys have made over the last year, it does make sense to bring in somebody like Porzingis, who's tall and can man the paint and just drop back and really fit that scheme well.
Yeah, and he'll do his job in the dynamic. He's going to hit his threes. Hopefully he repeats the post-up success he had last year, because that will be an important part of this. And they've said they're going to utilize him in that sense. We'll see. They were very three-point reliant last year. I think Porzingis actually posted up more times per game than the Celtics did as a team last year. So it will be an interesting change of pace in terms of setting those plays up, giving the passes to him in the post. The entry passes can be a challenge for not just them, but anyone in the league. So we'll see how that goes. White shifts to point guard. I like Horford at the 4 here, and I keep saying this. I expect Robb to start just with the defensive scheme and versatility there and the rotations and Horford's minutes. But I think in terms of making it work offensively, having Horford's passing out there, his floor spacing ability, if Porzingis is going to post up, it just makes more sense to me in an offensive sense. And then, it's less of a concern, but you do have 3 guys who are used to having a ton of shots. Like, there's going to have to be some amount of sacrifice there, especially for a guy, and I'm sure he's matured and I'm sure he's moved on from some of this, but didn't love being that second option in Dallas. Didn't love standing in the corner. Didn't love, being a guy who had to take a back seat in terms of his role there. Last year in Washington, I know Beal's there, I know Kuzma's there, but they're out a ton. It's not a very good team, and he's sort of just putting up as many shots as he wants each night and dominating. It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for him going to, I guess you call it the third man on this team. But overall, just for the offense, it's a lot of the same questions. Like, who's bringing the ball up? How are they connecting? Are they turning the ball over too much? Porzingis gives them a great option, and I guess the best argument I've heard is he makes Jalen's reads a little easier on the second unit. But just inserting Porzingis on the court here, and, you said you put 3 talented guys on the floor, they'll probably figure it out. But given Porzingis' skill set, he's not Jokic, right? He's not a guy who you're going to give the ball and he's going to be passing around and just connecting everything here. He's a scorer.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like, you play with a guy like Porzingis. I do like that he can post up, and I also like where he posts up, because he posts up from, like, the elbows and the middle of the free throw line, nail. And I think that gives you different angles for your offense. Like, if you're just running your offense from different areas of the floor, it adds versatility. You end up with different shots. Guys will need to cut around him. But there is a way where you can run a pick and roll 3-point heavy offense. But if you want to, for a couple possessions, run it through the elbows, middle of the free throw line, it just gives you different looks. So again, it has to work. You have to have guys that are not only able to play that way, but, like, really willing to play that way. But I do think it is an interesting thing to think about, just that you are having a different look in terms of where you're flowing out of in the half court.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me when you talk about these two teams, I guess you could call what the Nuggets had a big 3 between Porter, Murray, Jokic. There's enough star power there, I think, to call it that. You're always trying to stack up to the big 3s like LeBron, Wade, and Bosh and those types. So, sometimes the trio falls a little short of that name. But you have 3 stars on Denver. You have 3 stars here on Boston. You have a big guy is a big part of the dynamic here. I can't help but look at these moves and say, Boston looked at what Denver's doing out there, says we need to have a counter to that. And you end up with 3 stars, a big man who's going to be a significant part of the dynamic there, and a guy in Porzingis who I think brings a little bit of an edge. Like, I think Jokic, he brings a little bit of an edge of physicality and nastiness to that Denver team that I think Boston needed in Porzingis, who I think has some attitude, who I think can play physically. He's a little more finesse, but given that size, it does instill a little physicality, especially on the defensive end. They need to change the dynamic on this team. There's no doubt about it. And they had a couple different ways to go about it. Obviously, we all had our Jaylen Brown debates. Do you sign him? Do you trade him? Even going back to the Durant thing last summer, they end up extending him. They move on from Smart, a guy in the locker room who obviously had a massive voice. I just wrote yesterday about, like, that leadership component. You lose one of your loudest voices in Smart. You lose one of your loudest voices in Grant. How do you make up for that? Does that matter? That's one of my biggest questions coming into the year, because I do think it matters. Like, Porzingis, who knows? Like, I don't know much about him. I don't think people know as much about these players internally as they think they do, but
Yeah.
doesn't look it to me like a guy who's going to really be a loud, significant voice in that room, especially coming on to a new team. So you lose Smart, you lose Grant. Horford's there, but he's older, not playing as much next year, I'm sure, minutes wise. Is that a factor here, or is it all going to come down to the basketball?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think probably you hit on one of the two things. If I'm looking at Boston, is just like where's the voice coming from for this team? Is it because it's two quieter stars?
Yeah.
Where is that coming from? Health is the other one. And we can sit here, we could worry about the fit offensively, but I just sort of look at those three guys and I'm like, those players are really good. And
you throw Robb into it too. If he's healthy, they have even more options there. Yeah.
But I don't think the East is I don't know what you're looking at in the East. I mean, Miami getting Dame, sure, that team's threatening. And I think the East so much has been defined by just having, I don't even know, an institution in place that just seems to be what's helped teams in the past. Miami's come out of the East 2 of the last 4 years, just a really solid system, know how they're going to play. That's made the difference. Boston, year they go to the finals, they have a really solid system, scheme in place. They're all on the same page. And maybe that's like anything, but it really feels like the East is like that. So I don't know. I look at the East and I'm just kind of I don't know which team I'm looking at is okay, that's who's coming out, other than I guess Miami with Dame. And in a way, as long as there's health and there isn't any huge factions within the Boston locker room, I kind of feel like they're the team to do it.